Plants are the most amazing chemists. They can take 4 sugar molecules and make over 20,000 different terpenes. Plants can make over 10,000 different alkaloids from just 4 sugar molecules. And alkaloids are very important. Caffeine is an alkaloid, for example, and many of our psychedelics are alkaloids, psilocybin, for example. Nicotine is even an alkaloid. So plants can make thousands and thousands of molecules just from the carbon backbone of 4 sugars, over 8,000 different polyphenols. If you remember from some of my previous videos, polyphenols are very important for our friendly gut bacteria, for our beneficial gut bacteria that help with the gut-brain axis. I did a whole series of videos early this month, so check those out as well. And plants, why are they such good chemists? Well, they cannot run away and things want to eat them. So they develop specific chemical strategies that are very intelligent. And we're going to be talking about this all month. For example, plants like humans need probiotic or healthy bacteria to assist them. And so when a seed is germinating in the soil, when the seed is planted in the soil, it first sends out its little rootlets. Those rootlets emit chemicals in the soil that actually attract friendly bacteria to the root structures, and then the bacteria then form and live along the surface of the plant roots. Those bacteria, the friendly bacteria, will help do things like pull minerals out of the soil for the plant to be able to absorb and digest. So they're very helpful for the plant. And the friendly bacteria also secrete their own chemicals to prevent unfriendly, unhealthy bacteria from invading and trying to eat the plant, because plants are food for a lot of different things, are they not? Also, the fungus, the fungal elements in the soil, many are beneficial to the plants, and the plants will do the same thing they do for their friendly bacteria. They'll secrete chemicals to attract these funguses. The fungi come, they set up mycelial networks in the soil that are beneficial to the plants. And the friendly fungal elements also prevent unfriendly ones from interrupting. Plants have to heal themselves. If they get hurt or cut, broken in a storm, stepped on in the field, they have properties to heal themselves. So they make chemicals to do this. Also, plants have intelligent mechanisms that they directly target the physiology of animals for various reasons. Caffeine is a classic example of that. The coffee tree puts out a little caffeine in the flowers, and the pollinating insects come. So that is one way that plants directly target the physiology of other organisms. We're going to look at how plants in the wild, or animals in the wild, how do animals in the wild use plants as medicine? We're going to look at monkeys and bears, bees, and even elephants. So stay tuned. There's a reason why so many of our pharmaceutical drugs come from plant sources. It's because plants are the most amazing and intelligent chemists, and in many ways are better chemists than even our most advanced PhD and artificial intelligence, because they live in the real world and they're solving real world problems. I'm Dr. Jake Felice. Thank you for tuning in. I'll be doing this series of videos all throughout the rest of the month of May. I thank you very much for listening. Feel free to like, comment, share. And if you have any questions, let me know, because we'll be producing these as we go. And I thank you so much for listening. Cheers. How do plants make chemicals to heal themselves? We're going to be talking about how plants make chemicals to heal other creatures and other organisms. But how do plants make chemicals to heal themselves? Because many of these chemicals can be very useful for us as humans as well. As plants grow, they create chemicals that help restore and maintain their health. And these chemicals can possess anti-inflammatory properties for the plant itself. The plant makes its own anti-inflammatories, one of which is salicylic acid, which is present, which is the precursor for aspirin, a drug that we frequently use for its anti-inflammatory effects. So humans can use many of these chemicals that the plants are making for themselves. And whenever the plant needs these chemicals, the plants can automatically upregulate or start making more of these plants, increasing their production at any time. And they can also move these helpful chemicals all throughout their different body parts. And they can do this exceptionally rapidly. The tulip tree, for example, will produce several strong antimicrobial alkaloids that it stores in the center bark, deep in the hardwood. And it uses this to protect itself from invasion by microorganisms. And many of the antimicrobial chemicals that plants make can be very effective even at low concentrations. CBD, for example, has antibacterial properties against MRSA, which is a very difficult to treat, very highly resistant staph infection. And at very low concentrations. And the cool thing about CBD's antimicrobial properties or antibacterial properties is that it is occurring through a previously unknown mechanism, and we don't know yet what it is. Maybe folks on the cutting edge do, but we don't know what it is, and we haven't had a new antibacterial class of drugs in over 30 years. And in many instances, the invading pathogens will attack the plants. The invading bacteria or fungus will attack the plants. And when they attack the plants, these bacteria will start to secrete poisonous chemicals to injure the plant, because we're all food for worms, as Shakespeare said, and the plants can't run away. So these bacteria are literally trying to eat the plant. And when this happens, the plants are able to immediately identify the chemicals. And then they start to produce protective chemicals against the poisonous attack that's directed against them. One of these classes of chemicals is called phytoalexins. So the plants create chemicals designed to protect themselves in specific instances. There are many kinds of phytoalexins, one of which many of us have heard of is a polyphenol called resveratrol. It's very common. It's well known in red wine, but it comes from grapes and also Japanese knotweed. And resveratrol has gained attention for its potential health benefits, including therapeutic applications for cardiovascular protection, neural protection, cancer protection, anti-cancer protection, and anti-aging effects. You can Google resveratrol if you like. Also, we talked about fungal infections. When the spores of the fungus land on the leaves, they start to secrete little tubules called mycelium. And these tubes bore into the leaf to start to literally digest and eat the leaves of the plants. The plant will tailor-make a very specific defense cocktail specifically against that type of fungus and not against a different type of fungus. And then the plant will make these chemicals and push them directly out to the surface of the leaf where they can be most effective against the fungus. Now, if cell damage happens to the plant, they will release gums that do a couple of cool things. First, they lower the sugar concentration in the area of injury or attack, and this prevents the growth of funguses, also prevents the growth of bacteria, and decreases feeding opportunity for pathogenic organisms. Also, the gums will absorb toxins and keep them away from the delicate plant tissues that have been injured. And also the gums provide soothing and anti-irritant protective soothing properties to the tissues of the plants. And humans have used gums, acacia gum, for example. Even the ancient Romans used for wound healing in battles. And they would combine it with yarrow and pack the wounds. The Roman name for yarrow is soldier weed, because it was so useful for the centurions when they had their battle wounds. The yarrow possessed styptic qualities, and the acacia gums had the protective properties that we just discussed. So plant gums have been used in traditional medicine for centuries for wound healing, and even to this day, acacia gum can be used orally. It has some dental applications, which are really cool. Let me know if you want a reference on that. And also friendly and unfriendly gut bacteria, which was last month's theme. The acacia gum will help increase the healthy protective bacteria, and it helps eliminate and reduce the unhealthy bacteria in the gut. So these plants are doing amazingly cool things for themselves, specifically physiologically, but when we can use them intelligently as humans, we also can see the wisdom and the benefit of some of these wonderful herbal therapies. Lastly, because plants literally make oxygen, they take carbon dioxide, absorb the sun, and make sugars. And in that process, they create oxygen. Believe it or not, oxygen is very toxic. Oxygen causes rusting, for example. When we take a bite out of the apple, put it on the shelf and it turns red, that's an oxidation. And our DNA can actually get oxidized, and that can predispose us to cancer. And Earth's plants have thousands and thousands of compounds that possess antioxidant and anti-carcinogenic properties. And many of these chemicals, as I mentioned, can move rapidly throughout the plant, and the plant can move them to where they are needed. And also, these chemicals sometimes have multiple functions. So plants are very efficient with their chemistry, and they might make certain molecules that do many different things. CBD is a great example of a plant chemical that the plant uses, the hemp or cannabis plant. One of the ways that it uses CBD is it slows down cell growth of competing plants that might be growing or germinating in and around the cannabis plant. The CBD gets washed into the soil, and it prevents this and slows the cell division of the competing plants. And we first realized there was something going on here with CBD when in the 18th century, the 1700s in the US, we had farmers plant hemp everywhere. And if the hemp was planted around a pond, all of the fish would die. But they didn't die because the CBD was toxic to the fish. The fish died because the CBD slowed the reproduction effect of the algae, and the fish starved. So CBD also has wonderful, not only just anti-inflammatory properties, but some really amazing anti-cancer properties that are showing up in cell, tissue, and animal studies, and a few human studies as well. I'm Dr. Jake Felice, going to be talking about plant wisdom for the next couple of weeks. If you like this, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, give it a comment, ask a question. I'm here because I love this. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be doing more of these through the next coming couple of weeks. Cheers. How do plants make molecules to protect themselves from being eaten by insects and other organisms? And how might these molecules be effective and helpful in good medicines for humans? We talked a little bit in the past few videos about how plants will make molecules to heal themselves, and how those molecules that the plants use to heal themselves can be useful for humans. In this video and the next couple of videos, I want to talk about plant defenses and how plant defense molecules can also have application for our beneficial herbs and helping us to have and achieve good health. Another way, or another type of chemical that plants use to protect themselves, can be found in onions and mustard and in horseradish. And these are called glucosinolates, and these are stored with the glucosinolate right next to an enzyme, but separate, in the leaf and the plant and the root structures. And when the plant is chewed or cut or eaten, those enzymes combine with the chemical to create the effects. Many of us have had the experience when cutting onions that, boy, that chemical hits us and our eyes start to water. That's the combining of the enzyme with that glucosinolate, and it's an irritant that we're all familiar with. These glucosinolates also possess antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. They can help clear out sinus and congestion. And there is a very good naturopathic remedy for onion and middle ear infection. I have used this personally frequently as a surfer. I personally prefer to use garlic. I think it's more effective, but onion can certainly be effective for that. Feel free to email me or ask a question if you want more specifics on that. Another different class of molecule that plants make to prevent themselves from being eaten are called tannins. And these produce harmful effects in the animals depending on the amount that is eaten. In small amounts, not so harmful, and big amounts can be catastrophic. All tannins interfere with the ability of animals' stomachs to digest plants as food. The tannins precipitate protein, and in the plant, they store them separately from the proteins. But when insects or animals chew the leaves, this breaks the compartments open. The proteins and the tannins combine, and most insects or animals that eat a tannin-rich diet will actually die because they'll starve to death. Tannins work by denaturing proteins. So it happens when we cook an egg. It goes from the yolk, not the yolk, but the clear part goes from clear to white. That's a denaturing of proteins. That's how tannins work. And in human tissues, or in animal tissues, they can actually cause a tightening effect in the tissues. So there are actually some beneficial effects. There's a type of a lemur, which is a kind of a primate or a monkey, that typically does not ever eat plants containing tannins. However, the pregnant females, about a week before they give birth, will actually seek out and eat tannin-rich foods. And this is because these primates are reducing the risk of postpartum bleeding during childbirth, and also will promote vaginal tissue healing. Those tissues tighten up after the babies are born. As humans, we typically use witch hazel a lot. It's common. A lot of people are familiar with it. And the leaves and the bark of witch hazel are rich in tannins. And when applied topically, that can help tighten the skin, can cause a little wrinkle reduction, by pulling the tissues together. Tannins also create a protective covering that helps with skin healing because it can have some antibacterial properties and also reduce bleeding. And European and American herbalists have for many, many years used witch hazel as an oral and also as a suppository to help with hemorrhoids. Again, this tissue tightening property can be a very common remedy for hemorrhoids. I'm Dr. Jake Felice. We're going to be talking about the wisdom of plant medicine and why plants make molecules that we as humans can then use for our health and our benefits all month this month. So stay tuned. Please give this a like. Please make a comment, share. I love to hear your comments and questions. And thank you so much for listening. One thing I think it's important to understand is that there are some benefits to the plants for them to be eaten, typically in and around 10, maybe 25%. Plants will accept and even encourage a small amount of grazing. But after a certain point, they don't like it and they start to make protective molecules. And there are, as I mentioned, there are some benefits to the foraging that can change the density in the population of the undergrowth, promote diversity. And also when certain plants or birds eat fruits, for example, the seeds can be dispersed widely. Some plants will also even make specialized leaves early in their life cycle that encourage grazing. But as the plant matures and grows, they change the chemical structure of the leaves so that they're not as attractive or delicious for the organisms that are eating them. As I mentioned, after foraging rates get above a certain level, the plants start to defend themselves. Many plants will make these chemicals to prevent grazing. And then the types of these chemicals are diverse. One of the types of the chemicals are called glycosides. The glyco stands for sugar. Glycosides are typically toxic when the sugar is not on the molecule, but when they're together in the plant can keep them in the plant tissues and the leaf tissues without any trouble. But once the plant is eaten, that sugar molecule will separate, and the toxic effects can impact the body chemistry of the organism that is eating it. Now, there was a famous Greek doctor named Galen who mentioned his concept of that it is the dose that makes the poison. So some of these chemicals that are poisonous in high amounts can actually have beneficial and healthy properties in low and proper amounts. Foxglove is an example of this. It's got these beautiful white and pink flowers, and it was the template for the cardiac drug digitalis. The foxglove plant possesses cardiac glycosides, and foxglove has been used for centuries, and in the right amount, in the proper narrow therapeutic window, can stimulate the heart by increasing calcium levels inside of the heart muscle. Plants have developed the ability to make potent neurotoxins to protect themselves against grazing animals. One of the class of these molecules are called alkaloids, and alkaloids are directed at the physiology of other organisms, specifically to prevent animals from grazing on them, and these provide survival advantages for the plants. When animals consume these plants with these high levels of alkaloids in them, they suffer strange symptoms such as breathing irregularity, muscle weakness, and shaking. And in extreme doses, these chemicals can lead to paralysis, seizures, and even death. Among these alkaloids are substances such as nicotine, which can cause Parkinson's-like syndromes in animals, including in horses. And alkaloids are made by large numbers of plants. Certain potatoes, for example, and other plants in the nightshade family produce toxic alkaloids known as solanum type steroidal alkaloids. This is why we shouldn't eat potatoes with green in them. You cut those little nubs off of the potatoes because those can contain some toxic chemicals. In fact, alkaloids can be very toxic even in relatively low amounts. Even eating a half a pound of tobacco can kill a horse, for example, although in the wild, animals almost never, ever will take a toxic dose of this. They're just way too intelligent and have more sophisticated ways of understanding what they're eating than I think we are aware of a lot of the time. And it's only in overcrowded farming conditions where animals are compelled to feed without restraint that they can consume too many of these plants to the point of death. Alkaloids make a lot of molecules that a lot of us are aware of. I mentioned nicotine. They also make morphine, which is part of the opiate family, which is a plant. Opium is a plant, in case you might not have been aware of that. And another alkaloid called quinine is actually very helpful for malaria, and that comes from the cinchona tree. Also, chili peppers, that hot sensation we get from chili peppers comes from capsaicin. Capsaicin interacts very specifically with some of our receptors that are that affect pain and inflammation, and also can help boost metabolism. So this is some of the reason why some of the topicals, especially like the tiger balm, can have a heating sensation from that capsaicin. It creates anti-inflammatory and pain relieving effects. And even though Another alkaloid known as psilocybin doesn't come from plants. It comes from mushrooms, specifically magic mushrooms, as the colloquial term is called. The mushroom will also use this alkaloid to discourage others from grazing. But we also know now from new studies, many new human studies, that sometimes this psilocybin can have beneficial effects when taken under the right circumstance, including to help humans with the results of trauma and drug abuse and drug addiction. Hope that you are enjoying these videos. I'm Dr. Jake Felice. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, please subscribe. Feel free to make a comment. I try to answer all of my comments, and I'm really happy that you're listening. Hope that you're having a great day. Cheers. How do plants use chemicals to communicate? And how might this be an important concept in botanical medicine? We've already talked extensively about how plants make chemicals to heal themselves and how this can be important in medicine. And we've also discussed fairly extensively how plants make chemicals to stop other organisms from grazing upon them, and discussed how those can be and have medicinal properties. Today, I want to talk about how plants actually create very specific molecules to affect and communicate with other organisms. And this gives me hope because it can help us better understand how and why specific plants make terpene blends like cannabis and other botanicals. And I'm very curious about how the plants are making blends and not just using single terpenes, but they'll make blends to specifically address other organisms. So how do plants create special chemical mixtures to communicate with other organisms? Let's take a look. And one example is with aphids and overfeeding, not of the cannabis plant, but other plants. And some plants will release a terpene that very specifically mimics the alarm pheromone of the aphid. So aphids have an alarm signal, and the communication of this signal to other aphids is, hey, this is a dangerous situation. We better get out of here. So the aphids have their own alarm pheromone, chemical pheromone that they release, and the plants can mimic that. Have you ever noticed how many different types of cannabis can smell almost exactly like a skunk that's on the road? Aphids will specifically target this chemical to, the plants will specifically target this chemical to the nervous system of the aphids. Another example would be with lima beans and spider mites. The lima bean plant will, when it notices that the spider mites are attacking it, the lima bean plant releases a specific mixture of terpenes that don't affect the spider mite, but it affects the insects that eat the spider mite. And these chemical mixtures call in the predatory insects to eat the spider mites that are eating the plant. So again, here we have a plant making a very specific mixture to specifically target and communicate with the nervous system of another organisms. And the terpene blend helps reduce feeding and infestation. And a slightly different experiment, but also with spider mites and lima beans, the lima beans will actually analyze the saliva of the spider mites. And when they do this, they can tell exactly, specifically what type of spider mite it is. And they create a terpene blend or mixture specifically for that spider mite and not for any other type of spider mite. The lima beans will also then tell their neighboring lima bean plants, hey, we've got a very specific problem here with this very specific mite, and we are producing this very specific chemical to deter them. And all of the other lima beans in the surrounding area will also upregulate their terpene mixtures to very specifically target that one particular mite. I think this is kind of cool, and it gets me excited about how we might be able to utilize and affect technology to affect cannabis terpene blends for specific purposes, as well as for other botanicals. Different plants that are being eaten by caterpillars do a very similar thing with terpene mixtures. They will make up a mixture of terpenes that calls in a parasitic wasp to eat the caterpillars that are eating their leaves. And initially, the plants will only create this chemical exactly where the first caterpillars are starting to take bites out of the plant. But if that doesn't deter them, then the entire plant will start to make the terpenes. So the plants are very efficient with their energy, and they're only using certain amounts, the minimum amount necessary to achieve the job. This is a great way that we prescribe cannabis. We want to use the minimum amount to achieve the specific job that we're trying to target. Also, if the caterpillars will also, in addition to calling in the parasitic wasps, they put out a different mixture that makes the caterpillars slow down. It's like it makes the caterpillars sleepy so that it's easier for the wasps to eat the caterpillars that are eating the plants. So there's this very intelligent chemical targeting that is happening with botanicals, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. And in this particular case with the caterpillars, the very minute that the caterpillars are gone and not eating on the plants stop making the terpenes. So I think that that's a very interesting way for us to think about botanical chemicals, is that it is the mixtures that are important, and the plants are being and targeting these in very specific ways. Lastly, I want to talk about acacia tree. The acacia tree has thorns on it. Some of the thorns are like hollow tubes. And like we have friendly bacteria in our gut, the acacia tree attracts friendly ants. And the acacia tree will put out a very specific nectar for a very specific type of an ant. And the nectar contains sugars, it contains proteins, it contains fats or lipids that are very healthy and delicious for this one particular ant. This ant prevents infestation from any other insects, and they will also cut the lawn in and around the acacia tree to inhibit competing vegetation. They'll cut the leaves off of the other plants, and even if a vine starts to try to grow up the tree, the ants will attack it. And also, if any feeding animals, I don't know specifically what type of animals feed on acacia, but I'm thinking about small rodents perhaps, or herbivores of some type, the ants will also attack those animals that are trying to eat the acacia tree. So my hope with this video is that it kind of explains how intelligent plants make mixtures and not just single chemicals to very specifically target the physiology and neurobiology of other organisms. I'm Dr. Jake Felice. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your likes, your comments. You can find me at sweetwaterholistic.com, as well as on LinkedIn and YouTube. And I try to answer all of my comments. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for listening. How do animals use plants to heal themselves? And what can the wisdom of animals using plants for healing teach us about healing ourselves? In previous sections of this series, we discussed how injured plants make their own healing chemicals, including anti-inflammatory chemicals that the plants make for themselves, and how those can help with humans and our anti-inflammatory necessities. These molecules include alkaloids, tannins, terpenes, flavonoids, and other molecules. And we also discussed in previous sections how plants will make chemicals such as terpenes and tannins to protect themselves from being eaten by other organisms, and how we as humans can also use these molecules for our own benefits. Let's talk about animals using plants. Birds, for example, when they're making their nests, they will be very specific about which particular plants they choose. And they choose from a large variety of medicinal plants, and they will weave them into their nests to treat pest infestations, for example, and also to protect the immunity and health of their young. Birds will separate very specific plants from other ones that look almost identical to them, and they'll choose these particular plants for very specific reasons. Starlings, for example, will regularly select plants that are high in terpenes, and these volatile oils from the terpenes continuously bathe them and their young ones in the nests. Prey birds, such as hawks, owls, eagles, will also, because they bring meat back to their nests for their young, that meat can develop bacteria. And so these birds of prey will weave strongly antibacterial herbs into their nests to help protect their young ones from any potential bacterial infections. And many birds will specifically pick plants to help clear mites from their feathers. Insects do this too, which I think is really very interesting. Beetles and grasshoppers, for example, will use plant chemicals to keep their shells free of fungus and bacterial infections. And certain insects, when they are infested by mites, will specifically seek out medicinal plants to kill the mites. Other insects will gather chemicals for protection. The sawfly, for example, will go to pine and select various terpenes from pine trees and store them in their body that they'll release as a spray against predation. And grasshoppers will do something similar, using over 20 different plant chemicals, including terpenes, to produce these powerful deterrent sprays. So even the insects are using plants to heal themselves. And I find this fascinating. How does this intelligence develop, and how do the insects know specifically which plants to treat for what purposes? I find it fascinating. Honeybees collect resin from trees to make propolis that they use to protect the interior of their hive from infection. The resin from propolis comes from dozens of different types of trees: willow, alder, ash, birch, aspen. The bees will use them to combine resins with waxes, pollens, nectars, and their own internal enzymes to make the propolis. And propolis is very strongly antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, and anti-inflammatory. And it remains effective for years and years and years and years. The ancient Egyptians actually used propolis from bees in their mummification processes. I am Dr. Jake Felice. Hope that you find these interesting. In the next section, I will talk about mammals and how mammals use medicinal plants for their own benefit, including chimpanzees, pigs, dogs, bears, and monkeys. If you like what these videos are doing, feel free to buy me a coffee. There's a link below. I would really appreciate that. I don't have any revenue that I receive from these. I do it just out of a love of sharing of this information. And you can find me and all of my videos at sweetwaterholistic.com. Thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to like, share, and leave a comment. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening. How do animals use plants as medicine? In the last section, we talked about non-mammals, birds and insects, and how they use plants for medicine. And in this section, I'd like to talk about mammals. In India, wild boars, for example, that have infestations of intestinal worms will dig up and consume pigweed roots, pigweed, Boerbavia diffusa, which are high in anti-helminthic compounds, anti-worm compounds, to treat the worms. And in Mexico, The wild boars do the exact same thing, but instead of using pigweed, which doesn't grow there, they eat pomegranate roots, and the pomegranate roots have identical chemical compounds to the pigweed rather. So the animals are seeking out the exact same types of chemicals in different plants. And we've all seen dogs intentionally eat grass at certain times. Often they will separate a particular grass out from other types of grass and only eat that particular type of grass. Dogs will alter their choice of grasses depending on the condition. One of dogs' favorite grasses is known as quack grass. Quack grass. And quack grass regulates the gastrointestinal tract. It helps soothe and preserve mucous membranes, and also can help with kidney function and possesses antimicrobial and antibacterial properties. A researcher in East Africa described following a pregnant elephant around for nearly a year during the whole entire pregnancy, observing her diet and behavior. And the diet was remarkably consistent for nearly a year. And then right before giving birth, the elephant, she traveled over 28 miles to seek out one very specific tree and consumed large amounts of its leaves and bark. Shortly thereafter, her contractions began, and she gave birth to a healthy baby elephant. This particular tree is commonly used by Kenyan women and healers to facilitate childbirth. And we see this in other animals. For example, in primates, sifaka females do not eat plants that contain tannins. They avoid them. We talked about this in a previous section. However, shortly before childbirth, these primates will specifically seek out herbs that are high in tannins. And if you remember from the previous section, tannins can act as a styptic to prevent bleeding and also can help heal the vaginal tissue after childbirth. Chimpanzees, when suffering from intestinal parasites, will choose specific plants depending on the nature of the parasite. To kill and stop schistosome parasites, they seek out and ingest the pith of Veronia, which contains potent chemicals, including sesquiterpene lactones and steroidal glycosides. And it is the steroidal glycosides that suppress the mobility of the parasites. It slows the parasites' ability to move, and it also slows their egg-laying processes. So this helps reduce the worm population in their digestive tract. Interestingly, the chimps do something that I think is really cool about this particular plant that they are ingesting, is they pick out the piths that have the lowest amount of sesquiterpene lactones and the highest amount of glycosides. So they're being very specific about which piths of which particular plant they are using. And they use this as a type of intelligence to increase the effectiveness and decrease the toxicities of the medication that they are using to treat their worm infestations. And if the parasites are different, the chimps will seek out completely different types of plants. For example, in the case of an esophageal or stomach parasites, the chimps will choose a very bristly, rough-haired leaf from Aspilla, the Aspilla plant, and these leaves have high levels of something called thiorubrine, which is a sulfur-containing chemical that is active against a wide variety of intestinal worms that commonly affect chimps. And the chimps will actually test the leaves. They'll put the leaves in their mouth and they'll suck on the leaf for an extended period of time before deciding, does this leaf have the chemicals in it that are needed or not? And if so, they'll continue to eat from that plant, or they will go and they will choose a different plant. And additionally, they don't chew the leaves, they fold them. And so because they're folded and not chewed, the thiorubrine does not break down in the stomach, so it remains an effective medicine. And the chimps also take these herbs early in the morning before they begin feeding, so that the leaves can be the first thing that pass through the digestive tract unencumbered by other food. For a different type of worms, cyanohabitus worms, the chimps will swallow the leaves of the ficus tree whole, also early in the morning. And they only choose the young leaves. They don't choose the older leaves because the young leaves have higher levels of the particular chemicals that they are looking for to treat the infestation. And sometimes the chimps will even chew these leaves and rub that on their fur to prevent skin parasites. Another raccoon-like animal, South American coati, will rub resin from a particular tree, Tratanicia aspera tree, and rub it on their fur also to protect from parasites. Capuchin monkeys will eat 6 different types of plants for the same purpose, and the capuchins will also seek water that comes from the rain, goes over the trees and the bark, and it collects in between the junctions where the tree limbs meet the trunk. And so they're actually getting a tea from the rain and the tree, and they will take this water and they will use it to bathe themselves to help prevent and clear parasites, like an herbal wash. Bears do something similar with osha root. Osha root in certain Plains Indian languages is known as bear medicine. And all the way down South and Central America, the Aztecs also call osha root bear medicine. I find that interesting. And what happens is the bears, after hibernation, the males will go out and dig up the osha root, eat the osha root, and they will also make a paste with their mouth, which they will rub and roll over their fur to help get rid of parasites that have collected over the winter, shall we say. And they're also a little bit chivalrous because the males will bring osha root back for the females and will also chew and apply that to the female's fur. And even before Homo sapiens, hominids, human-like creatures, including Neanderthals, which we now know have had a fairly advanced civilization. We've found medicinal plants in caves dating back tens of thousands of years. And in human records, over the last 6,000 years, we have instances of tens of thousands of different plants being used for human consumption as medicine. So people like insects, bears, butterflies, dogs, elephants, we all have been using plants as medicine for a long time. I'm Dr. Jake Felice. I love making these videos. Please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. And if you enjoy what I'm doing and want to buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. I do these out of the sheer love of it. And you can find me and all of my work and videos at sweetwaterholistic.com. Thank you so much for listening.